Marcus Chen wiped down the sticky bar counter for the third time that evening, his weathered hands moving in practiced circles across the synthetic wood surface. The neon sign outside his establishment flickered intermittently, casting alternating shadows of blue and red across the dingy interior of the nexus point. It wasn't much to look at, but it was his, carved out of the lower levels of New Babylon Station, with nothing but determination and his grandfather's recipe for synthetic whiskey. The station hummed around him, a constant reminder that he existed in the belly of one of humanity's greatest achievements. 50 years ago, when the first contact protocols were established, nobody expected that the greatest diplomatic breakthrough would happen in dive bars scattered across the outer rim. Yet here they were, serving drinks to species from across the galaxy, each with their own customs, their own problems, and their own coins to spend. Marcus had seen it all in his 15 years running the Nexus Point. Crystalline beings who absorbed alcohol through their skin, gas-form entities that appreciated the ambiance more than the drinks, and even the occasional human trader looking for a taste of home. He prided himself on treating everyone equally, as long as they paid their tab and didn't start trouble. That's why the figure in the corner booth bothered him so much. For 3 weeks now, the same individual had occupied the same seat every evening from 1800 to 2400 hours. Never ordered food, never spoke to other patrons, just nursed a single glass of Terran brandy and stared at the entrance with an intensity that made Marcus's other customers uncomfortable. The stranger wore what appeared to be a ceremonial uniform, deep purple fabric with intricate silver threading that seemed to shift and move in the light. A high collar obscured most of their face, and metallic gauntlets covered their hands completely. Marcus had tried engaging in conversation multiple times, but received only curt nods in response. The being paid for their drink in untraceable credits, left no tip, and created an atmosphere that was slowly driving away his regular customers. Bad for business was bad for business, regardless of species or circumstance. Tonight felt different. The usual crowd of dock workers and transport pilots was noticeably thinner, and Marcus had caught several patrons glancing nervously toward the corner booth before hastily finishing their drinks and leaving. The stranger's presence had evolved from merely uncomfortable to genuinely disruptive. Marcus made his decision. He poured himself a shot of his grandfather's whiskey, knocked it back for courage, and walked over to the corner booth. Up close he could see more details of the uniform. The silver threading wasn't just decorative but formed complex patterns that seemed to represent star charts or mathematical equations. The fabric itself appeared to be woven from materials he couldn't identify, simultaneously appearing ancient and impossibly advanced. "Listen, friend," Marcus began, his voice carrying the no-nonsense tone he'd perfected during his years in the Merchant Marine. "I don't know what your deal is, but you're scaring away my customers. This is a business, not a library. You can't just camp out here every night like you're waiting for something." The figure slowly turned their head toward Marcus. Beneath the high collar, he could see pale skin and eyes that seemed to contain flecks of silver light. When they spoke, their voice was surprisingly soft with an accent he couldn't place. "I have conducted myself within your establishment's posted regulations. I have purchased the required minimum beverage and have not engaged in disruptive behavior." Marcus felt his irritation spike. Posted regulations don't cover making people uncomfortable just by existing. "Look around. Half my regulars won't even come in anymore because you sit there like some kind of statue. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're waiting for, take it somewhere else." The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. "You do not understand the significance of my presence here." "You're right, I don't, and frankly, I don't care. What I understand is profit and loss, and you're definitely in the loss column." Marcus leaned forward, placing his palms on the table. "I'm asking you nicely to find somewhere else to do your waiting. There are plenty of other establishments on this station." For a long moment, the stranger said nothing. Then they reached into their uniform and produced a small crystalline object that pulsed with internal light. They placed it carefully on the table between them. "This identifies me as a guardian of the Silent Watch Third Circle, stationed at the threshold of memory. My presence here is not by choice but by sacred duty, passed down through 17 generations of my people." Marcus glanced at the crystal, then back at the stranger's face. "That's very interesting, but it doesn't change anything. Sacred duty or not, you're still bad for business. I need you to leave." The stranger's expression hardened. "You would deny a guardian their rightful place of vigil?" I would deny anyone who's costing me money their rightful place at my tables. Marcus straightened up, crossing his arms. This is my establishment on a human station operating under human law. Your religious obligations don't supersede my property rights. The Guardian slowly stood, their movement fluid despite the apparent weight of their uniform. They towered over Marcus by at least a foot, and he found himself resisting the urge to step backward. The crystalline identification was returned to the depths of their uniform with deliberate precision. Very well, Marcus Chen of Earth. I will honor your request and remove myself from your establishment, but know that your actions tonight will have consequences that extend far beyond your understanding of profit and loss. With that, the Guardian walked toward the exit, their footsteps surprisingly silent on the metal deck plating. They paused at the door, looking back over their shoulder. When the morning comes, remember that some duties are written in the fabric of the universe itself. Your ignorance of them does not make them any less real. The door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss, leaving Marcus alone in his bar. He looked around at the empty tables and chairs, then walked back to his position behind the bar. Outside, the station continued its endless rotation, carrying its cargo of beings and dreams through the void between stars. Marcus poured himself another shot of whiskey and tried to ignore the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. Marcus woke to the sound of alarms, not the gentle chime of his personal chronometer, but the deep, resonant emergency klaxons that meant something had gone seriously wrong aboard New Babylon Station. He rolled out of his narrow bunk in the cramped quarters above his bar, his feet hitting the cold deck plating as red emergency lighting bathed everything in an ominous glow. The station's intercom crackled to life with the voice of Commander Sarah Walsh, the station's administrator. Her usually calm demeanor was strained, words clipped with barely controlled tension. All citizens are advised to remain in their quarters until further notice. We are experiencing unprecedented system malfunctions across multiple sectors. Engineering teams are responding to the situation. Do not attempt to access restricted areas. This is not a drill. Marcus pulled on his clothes and checked his wrist display. 347 hours. He'd only been asleep for 3 hours since closing the bar, and already the universe seemed determined to make his day more complicated. Through the small porthole in his quarters, he could see the distant stars flickering strangely, as if something was interfering with the visual sensors. A heavy thud echoed from somewhere below in his bar, followed by the distinctive sound of breaking glass. Marcus grabbed a plasma torch from his emergency kit and made his way downstairs, moving carefully in the dim emergency lighting. The main level of the nexus point was in chaos. Every bottle behind the bar had shattered simultaneously, covering the floor in a carpet of glass and spilled alcohol. Tables and chairs had been overturned, not as if someone had ransacked the place, but as if some invisible force had swept through the room. Most disturbing of all, the corner booth where the Guardian had sat for 3 weeks was now surrounded by a perfect circle of frost, the metal deck plating covered in ice crystals that shouldn't have been able to form in the station's controlled atmosphere. Marcus approached the frozen area cautiously, his breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. As he drew closer, he could see that the frost formed intricate patterns, similar to the silver threading on the Guardian's uniform. Mathematical symbols and star charts were etched in ice across the floor, creating a complex mandala of meaning that hurt his eyes to look at directly. His wrist display chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as unknown, but when Marcus opened it, he recognized the Guardian's distinctive script. The threshold weakens without its watch. The deep dark stirs in response to your choices. 3 cycles remain before the breaking. You have until dawn to comprehend what your actions have unleashed. Marcus stared at the message, then at the frozen booth, then back at the message. What the hell is a threshold? He muttered to the empty bar. As if in response to his question, another violent shudder ran through the station. This time Marcus felt it in his bones, a vibration that seemed to resonate at frequencies that human engineering wasn't designed to handle. The lights flickered, and for a moment he could swear he saw movement in the shadows between the overturned tables. His personal communicator buzzed. The caller ID showed Jenny Martinez, who ran the supply depot 3 levels up. Jenny never called unless something was seriously wrong. Marcus, thank God you answered. Jenny's voice was tight with fear. Are you seeing this stuff? My whole storage bay is filled with some kind of black mist, and it's moving like it's alive. The environmental systems can't clear it out. What's happening down there? My bar looks like a bomb went off, and I've got an ice sculpture where my best table used to be, Marcus replied, stepping carefully around the broken glass. Emergency klaxons have been going for 20 minutes. You hear anything official? Nothing useful. Commander Walsh is running around like her hair's on fire, and half the engineering teams are reporting equipment failures they can't explain. But Marcus, there's something else. I was talking to old Pete from the observatory deck, and he says the exterior sensors are picking up something big heading our way. Something that doesn't match any known ship configuration. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frozen air around the corner booth. How big? Big enough to dwarf the station. And it's not broadcasting any identification signals. Pete thinks it might not be artificial at all. After ending the call, Marcus stood in the wreckage of his bar, trying to piece together what was happening. The Guardian had spoken of duty and consequences, of things written in the fabric of the universe. The message mentioned something called the deep dark and a breaking that would occur in 3 cycles. 3 cycles could mean 3 days, 3 hours, or 3 of whatever time measurement the Guardian's people used. Given the escalating situation, Marcus suspected it was closer to hours. He made his way to his personal terminal and began searching the station's databases for any reference to Guardians. Silent watch or threshold of memory. Most searches returned nothing, but deep in the archived cultural exchange files, he found a single entry that made his blood run cold. The entry was a brief anthropological note filed by Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's xenology specialist, dated 3 years ago. It described an encounter with a being calling themselves a guardian of the Silent Watch, who had requested permission to establish a monitoring post aboard the station. The request had been denied due to insufficient information about their intentions. But buried in the technical appendix was a single line that made Marcus's hands shake as he read it. Subject claimed to be maintaining vigil against entities from what they termed the deep dark, described as beings of pure entropy that exist in the spaces between dimensional boundaries. Warning: subject appeared genuinely terrified when discussing these entities. Another message appeared on his wrist display, this one from an automated system he didn't recognize. Dimensional barriers compromised. Breach probability increasing. Guardian absent from post for 4.7 hours. Recommend immediate restoration of watch protocols. Marcus looked around his destroyed bar, at the impossible frost patterns, at the shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. For the first time since the Guardian had left, he began to understand that this wasn't about religious ceremony or ancient traditions. This was about something trying to break through into their reality, and the only thing that had been standing in its way was the figure he'd thrown out of his bar because they were bad for business. Outside, the emergency klaxons continued their urgent wailing, and Marcus could swear he heard something else underneath them. A sound like whispers in a language that predated human speech, growing stronger with each passing moment. Marcus ran through the corridors of New Babylon Station, his emergency authorization badge bouncing against his chest as he navigated the chaos that had engulfed the once orderly facility. The main transit tubes were shut down, forcing him to use maintenance corridors that smelled of ozone and fear. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and he could hear the distant sounds of panic echoing from the residential sectors. Dr. Elena Vasquez's office was located in the xenology wing, 17 levels up from his bar. Marcus had never spoken to her directly, but her research files might contain the only clues to understanding what the Guardian had been protecting them from. He needed answers, and he needed them before whatever was approaching the station arrived. The lift to the upper levels was functional but erratic, stopping twice between floors for no apparent reason. During the second stop, Marcus heard something that made his skin crawl. Through the elevator shaft, carried by the station's ventilation system, came a sound like singing, but it wasn't any melody designed for human ears. The notes seemed to exist in frequencies that bypassed his conscious mind and went straight to his nervous system, triggering a primal fear response that left him shaking. When the elevator finally reached the xenology wing, Marcus found the corridors filled with a thin, gray mist that hadn't been there during his previous visits to the upper levels. The mist moved against the air circulation patterns, flowing in streams and eddies that suggested intelligence. Wherever it touched the walls, frost began to form, creating the same intricate patterns he'd seen in his bar. Dr. Vasquez's office was at the end of the corridor, and Marcus could see light spilling out from under her door. He knocked urgently, then entered without waiting for permission. Elena Vasquez was a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the universe's stranger corners. She looked up from a collection of ancient texts and star charts spread across her desk, her expression a mixture of relief and terror. "Mr. Chen, thank God. I was hoping someone would come. I've been trying to reach Commander Walsh, but the communication systems are compromised." She gestured to the materials on her desk. "Tell me you didn't actually force the Guardian to leave their post." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "You know about that?" "I know about a lot of things I wish I didn't. Sit down, please. We don't have much time." Elena pointed to a chair across from her desk. 3 years ago, when that Guardian first requested permission to station themselves here, I spent weeks researching their claims. What I found kept me awake for months. She pulled out a thick folder filled with documents in dozens of different languages and scripts. The Silent Watch isn't just some religious order. They're the descendants of the first species to encounter what they call the Deep Dark. Entities that exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on the collapse of dimensional barriers. Marcus leaned forward. The message mentioned something about barriers being compromised. Our universe exists in a delicate balance with countless others. Most of the time, the barriers between realities are strong enough to keep things separate, but certain locations, certain configurations of space and matter, create weak points, thresholds where things can slip through. Elena's hand shook as she turned pages in one of her texts. New Babylon Station was built on one of those weak points. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Guardian was here to watch the threshold, to keep something from coming through, not just to watch, to actively maintain the barriers through some kind of consciousness-based reinforcement technique. Their people have been doing this for thousands of years, standing vigil at weak points across the galaxy. Elena looked up from her research, and now, for the first time in 17 generations, this particular post is unmanned. Another violent shudder ran through the station, stronger than the previous ones. Through Elena's office window, Marcus could see the external view screens showing something that defied comprehension. The space around New Babylon Station was no longer black. Instead, it rippled with colors that had no names, and shapes that hurt to perceive directly seemed to be pressing against the hull from impossible directions. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. "According to the Guardian's message, 3 cycles. Based on the acceleration of events, I estimate that means 3 hours in standard time." Elena stood up and began gathering specific documents. But there might be a way to fix this. Marcus felt a surge of hope. How? The barriers don't just collapse naturally. They require specific conditions to weaken them completely. The Guardian's presence was maintaining those conditions in a stable state. Elena pulled out a star chart covered in mathematical notations. But if someone else could take their place, even temporarily, the barriers might hold long enough for the Guardian to return. Someone else? You mean a human? Humans have one advantage that most species don't. You're incredibly adaptable both physically and mentally. Your brains can process multiple reality states simultaneously without immediately going insane. Elena's eyes were bright with desperate hope. It's theoretically possible that a human could perform the same function as a Guardian, at least for a short time. Marcus thought about the frozen booth in his bar, about the impossible frost patterns and the shadows that moved independently. What would that involve? Consciousness projection into the dimensional interface. You would need to sit in the exact spot where the Guardian maintained their vigil and focus your mind on reinforcing the barriers between realities. Elena handed him a small device that looked like a crystalline headband. "This is a neural amplifier I've been working on. It might help you interface with the threshold directly." "Might help?" "Mr. Chen, I have to be honest with you. This is completely theoretical. No human has ever attempted to interface with a dimensional threshold before. It could kill you, drive you insane, or worse." Elena's expression was grim. "But if we don't try, those things pressing against our hull are going to break through in less than 3 hours. And when they do, they won't just destroy New Babylon Station. They'll use this threshold as a permanent gateway into our reality." Marcus looked at the neural amplifier, then at the chaos visible through the office window. He thought about his bar, about the life he'd built on this station, about the thousands of beings who called New Babylon home. He thought about the Guardian's words about duties written in the fabric of the universe itself. How do I get back to my bar without getting killed by whatever's happening out there? Elena smiled grimly. Very carefully. And Mr. Chen, when you see the Guardian again, you might want to start with an apology. Marcus pocketed the neural amplifier and headed for the door. Outside, the gray mist had grown thicker, and the singing from the ventilation shafts had become a chorus. He had less than 3 hours to get back to his bar, figure out how to interface with forces beyond human understanding, and somehow hold back entities that existed in the spaces between realities. Just another day in the life of a small business owner. The journey back to his bar became a nightmare that tested every survival skill Marcus had learned during his years in the merchant marine. The gray mist had evolved into something more aggressive, reaching toward him with tendrils that felt disturbingly solid when they made contact with his skin. Where they touched, his flesh went numb with a cold that seemed to penetrate down to his bones. The maintenance corridors had become a maze of impossible geometry. Passages that should have led straight down to the lower levels instead curved upward, or opened onto sections of the station that Marcus knew didn't exist. He found himself in chambers filled with machinery that hummed with frequencies that made his teeth ache, and corridors where the walls displayed star charts from galaxies that might not have been real. The neural amplifier Elena had given him seemed to help. When he wore it, the disorienting effects of the dimensional distortions were reduced enough that he could navigate by instinct rather than sight. But it also made him more aware of the things moving in the shadows between realities, shapes that existed only in his peripheral vision, always gone when he turned to look directly at them. By the time Marcus reached the service hatch that led down to his bar, the station's emergency systems had begun shutting down non-essential sections. The hatch required manual operation, and as he cranked it open, he could hear the sounds from below that confirmed his worst fears. His bar was no longer empty. Marcus dropped through the hatch as quietly as possible, landing in the storage room behind his bar's main area. Through the connecting doorway, he could see that the frost around the corner booth had spread across the entire floor. But now, instead of empty space above the frozen patterns, there were shapes moving in the air, translucent figures that seemed to exist only partially in his reality. Drifting through the room like three-dimensional shadows, the entities from the deep dark had found the weakened threshold. Marcus activated the neural amplifier and immediately felt the world shift around him. The bar's normal dimensions expanded in directions he couldn't name, and he could see the dimensional barriers as gossamer threads stretched between points of light that might have been stars, or might have been neurons in some cosmic brain. The threads were fraying, breaking one by one as the entities pressed against them from the other side. But he could also see something else. In the corner booth, barely visible even with the amplifier's enhancement, was the ghostly outline of the Guardian. They were still there, still trying to maintain their vigil, but without their physical presence to anchor them. Their consciousness was being overwhelmed by the forces they were fighting. Marcus understood what he had to do. He moved through the bar carefully, stepping around the translucent entities that drifted between the tables. They seemed unaware of his presence, focused entirely on widening the gaps in the dimensional barriers. As he approached the corner booth, the cold became intense enough to make his breath form ice crystals in the air. The Guardian's outline became more visible as Marcus drew closer. Through the neural amplifier, he could hear their voice, strained with exhaustion and desperation. Cannot maintain. Barriers failing. Need physical anchor. Marcus slid into the booth across from where the Guardian's fading presence sat. The moment his body made contact with the frozen surface, pain shot through him like lightning. But underneath the pain, he felt something else. Connection. The same sensation he'd experienced when he'd first learned to navigate by the stars during his merchant marine days. That moment when the universe suddenly made sense. I'm here, he said, speaking both aloud and through the strange mental link that the neural amplifier had opened. Tell me what to do. The Guardian's consciousness reached toward his, and Marcus felt their relief like warm sunlight after a long winter. You came back. Why? Because this is my home and these are my people. Now teach me how to hold the line. What followed was the most intense learning experience of Marcus's life. The Guardian's consciousness merged partially with his own, showing him how to perceive the dimensional barriers not as abstract concepts, but as living things that responded to will and intention. Marcus learned to feel the pressure from the deep, dark entities, to sense where the barriers were weakest, and to project his own mental energy into reinforcing the failing points. It was like trying to hold back an ocean with his bare hands while solving mathematical equations that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The strain was enormous, and Marcus could feel his human brain beginning to overload from processing reality states that it wasn't designed to comprehend. But humans, as Elena had noted, were adaptable. Instead of trying to understand everything at once, Marcus began to compartmentalize. He divided his consciousness into sections, assigning each one a specific portion of the barrier to maintain. It wasn't elegant or efficient like the Guardian's method, but it worked. The translucent entities in the bar began to fade as the dimensional barriers solidified under Marcus's crude but effective reinforcement. The deep dark's pressure on the threshold decreased, and the impossible geometries that had been twisting through the station began to stabilize. Impressive. The Guardian's voice was stronger now, their outline becoming more solid as the crisis passed. Your species' mental flexibility is remarkable. You're essentially performing 17 different consciousness projection techniques simultaneously. Marcus grinned, though the effort was causing blood to run from his nose. I've always been good at multitasking. How long can I keep this up? Not long. Your neural pathways are already showing strain, but long enough for me to restore my physical presence and resume my duties. The Guardian's form began to solidify further. Marcus Cheneverth, you have done something unprecedented. You have successfully interfaced with a dimensional threshold using nothing but human determination and improvised technique. The pain was becoming unbearable, and Marcus could feel his consciousness beginning to fracture under the strain. But through the neural link, he could sense the Guardian's strength returning, their ancient training reasserting control over the barriers that Marcus had been crudely holding together. There, the Guardian said, and Marcus felt the cosmic weight lifted from his mind. I have reestablished my anchor. You may release your hold. Marcus slumped forward onto the table, his vision blurring as his overtaxed brain tried to process what he had just experienced. The corner booth was still covered in frost, but the chaotic patterns had been replaced by orderly geometric designs that seemed to pulse with quiet strength. The Guardian was fully solid now, sitting across from him with an expression of profound respect. You saved not just this station, but countless realities that would have been consumed if the deep dark had established a permanent foothold. Here. The Guardian reached across the table and placed one metallic gauntlet over Marcus's trembling hand. I owe you in debt that cannot be repaid. Marcus looked up, managing a weak smile. Just promise me you'll be more understanding the next time someone doesn't recognize the importance of what you're doing. And you, perhaps, will be more careful about ejecting customers whose presence you do not fully comprehend. Through the bar's windows, Marcus could see that the space around New Babylon Station had returned to normal black, filled with familiar stars instead of impossible colors. The emergency klaxons had fallen silent, and he could hear the distant sounds of normal station operations resuming. But he knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. He had seen beyond the boundaries of human reality, and the experience had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The next 48 hours brought changes to New Babylon Station that Marcus could never have anticipated. Word of what had happened spread through the galactic community, with the speed that only truly extraordinary news could achieve. Within hours of the dimensional barriers being restored, ships began arriving from across known space, carrying representatives from species that Marcus had never even heard of. His bar had become, quite literally, the most important location in human space. Commander Walsh had tried to restrict access to the lower levels, but the diplomatic pressure was enormous. The Silent Watch, it turned out, was not just one species, but a coalition of dozens of different civilizations, all united in their ancient duty to guard against the deep dark. The fact that a human had successfully interfaced with a dimensional threshold was being hailed as either a miraculous breakthrough or a dangerous anomaly, depending on who was doing the talking. Marcus stood behind his rebuilt bar, serving drinks to customers unlike any he'd ever imagined hosting. The crystalline being in Booth 3 absorbed alcohol through their skin and glowed brighter with each drink. The gas form entity near the window communicated through harmonic vibrations that made the glassware sing in perfect pitch. And in the corner booth, the Guardian maintained their vigil with renewed purpose, though now their presence seemed less ominous and more protective. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat at the bar, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the proceedings with the fascination of a xenologist whose wildest theories had just been proven correct. The neural scans from your threshold interface are causing quite a stir in academic circles, she told Marcus as he cleaned a glass, with hands that still occasionally trembled. You're the first human to survive direct consciousness contact with interdimensional forces. The medical implications alone could revolutionize our understanding of human neural plasticity. Marcus set down the glass and looked at his hands. Since the interface, he'd noticed changes in himself that went beyond simple physical after effects. He could perceive things differently now, see patterns in the movement of crowds, sense the emotional states of his alien customers in ways that felt almost telepathic. Sometimes when he concentrated, he could still feel the distant pulse of the dimensional barriers around the station. I'm not sure I want to be a medical curiosity, he said. I just want my bar back to normal, Elena smiled. I don't think normal is an option anymore. Do you know what some of the silent watch species are calling you? I'm afraid to ask. Bridgewalker. The first being to successfully cross the gap between guardian consciousness and baseline awareness without centuries of preparation. Elena gestured toward the crowded bar. Half these species want to study you, and the other half want to recruit you. As if summoned by their conversation, a tall figure approached the bar. Marcus recognized the newcomer as another guardian, though their uniform was different from his usual customer's regalia. Instead of purple fabric with silver threading, this guardian wore deep blue with patterns that seemed to incorporate actual starlight. Marcus Chen of Earth, the newcomer said, their voice carrying formal authority. I am Keeper Valix of the First Circle, representative of the High Council of the Silent Watch. I bring greetings from the eldest guardian and a proposition that may interest you. Marcus continued cleaning his glass, though he paid careful attention to every word. I'm listening. Your successful interface with the threshold has revealed capabilities within human consciousness that we had not previously documented. The High Council wishes to offer you formal training in the arts of dimensional guardianship. Keeper Valix placed an ornate scroll on the bar. Such training would allow you to establish and maintain your own threshold watch, should humanity wish to join our coalition. The implications hit Marcus immediately. You're talking about making humans part of the Silent Watch. We are talking about recognizing that humans possess natural abilities that could serve the greater cause of protecting reality from the deep dark. Your species' mental flexibility, combined with proper training, could produce guardians capable of maintaining multiple thresholds simultaneously. Elena leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. How many thresholds are there? Keeper Valix's expression grew grave. 17,432 known dimensional weak points across the galaxy. We have guardians stationed at approximately 60% of them. The remainder must be monitored by automated systems that are less reliable than conscious oversight. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the corner booth's residual frost. You're saying that almost 40% of potential breaches are unguarded? The deep dark is patient. They probe constantly, seeking weaknesses. Every unguarded threshold represents a potential gateway for entities that view inhabited reality as nothing more than food. Keeper Valix's starlight patterns pulsed with urgency. Your demonstration proves that human consciousness can adapt to guardian protocols far more quickly than any species we have previously encountered. If humanity could train even a small cadre of threshold guardians. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Marcus looked up to see Jenny Martinez from the supply depot rushing in, her face flushed with excitement and concern. Marcus, you need to see this. Something's happening to the humans on the station. People are reporting strange experiences, enhanced perceptions, almost like they're picking up echoes of what you did with the threshold. Elena immediately pulled out her medical scanner and began taking readings from the nearest human customers. Her expression grew increasingly amazed as she reviewed the data. This is incredible. Residual dimensional energy from the threshold interface is somehow spreading through the human population aboard the station. Neural activity levels are elevated across the board, and I'm detecting enhanced pattern recognition capabilities in everyone I've scanned. Keeper Valix's attention sharpened. The effect is propagating beyond the primary interface subject. It appears that human neural networks are more interconnected than we realized, Elena said, her voice tight with scientific excitement. Marcus's consciousness expansion may have created a resonance effect that's temporarily enhancing the dimensional awareness of every human within a certain radius. Marcus looked around, his bar with new understanding. The human customers weren't just adapting to the presence of alien species better than usual. They were actually perceiving their alien companions in ways that transcended normal sensory input, reading emotional states and intentions through methods that bypassed language entirely. "How many humans are on this station?" Keeper Valix asked. "About 3,000, Jenny replied. "And according to the reports coming in, all of them are experiencing some level of enhanced awareness." The Guardian from the corner booth finally spoke, their voice carrying a note of wonder. "In 17 generations of service, no Guardian has ever successfully extended their consciousness enhancement to others of their species. Yet this human has inadvertently created a network effect that spans thousands of individuals." Keeper Valix was silent for a long moment, clearly processing implications that Marcus couldn't fully grasp. When they finally spoke, their voice carried the weight of momentous decision. The High Council must be informed immediately. If human consciousness operates on collective principles rather than individual ones, the potential applications for dimensional guardianship are beyond our current understanding. They turned to Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your species may represent the most significant evolution in reality protection since the Silent Watch was first established." Marcus looked around his bar, at the aliens and humans mingling with unprecedented ease, at the Guardian maintaining their vigil in the corner, at the place where he'd held back entities from beyond reality itself. He thought about the 17,000 thresholds spread across the galaxy, and the countless lives that depended on keeping the barriers between realities intact. Then, he thought about his grandfather as recipe for synthetic whiskey and the simple life. He'd been trying to build in this small corner of the universe. "Keeper Valix," he said finally, "I think we need to talk." The meeting took place in Marcus's private quarters above the bar, though the small space felt inadequate for the momentous decisions being discussed. Keeper Valix had been joined by 2 other First Circle Guardians, while humanity was represented by Marcus, Elena, and surprisingly, Commander Sarah Walsh, who had been quietly observing the situation from the station's administrative perspective. Marcus had pushed his small table against the wall to create more space, but even so, the room felt crowded with the weight of galactic implications. Through his tiny porthole, he could see the constant stream of ships arriving and departing, carrying news of the events at New Babylon Station to every corner of civilized space. The training process would take approximately 6 standard months, Keeper Valix was explaining, their starlight patterns shifting to match their words. During that time, Mr. Chen would learn to consciously control the dimensional interface abilities he demonstrated during the crisis. More importantly, he would learn to teach those abilities to others. Commander Walsh leaned forward. "And in return, humanity would take responsibility for guarding how many thresholds?" "Initially, perhaps 50 to 100 weak points in human space and nearby sectors. As your people develop proficiency, that number could expand significantly." Another Guardian, who had introduced herself as Watcher Keth, consulted a holographic display that showed the galaxy with pulsing points of light. "Your species' collective consciousness capabilities suggest that human Guardians could maintain multiple thresholds with greater efficiency than any existing protection. Protocols." Elena was taking detailed notes on her tablet, her scientific mind already racing ahead to the implications. "What about the enhancement effect we observed among the other humans on the station? Will that persist?" "That depends partly on Mr. Chen's choice," Keeper Valix replied. "If he accepts training, he could learn to deliberately extend dimensional awareness to others. The network effect your species demonstrates could allow a single trained Guardian to enhance the capabilities of hundreds or even thousands of baseline humans." Marcus had been listening in silence, turning a glass in his hands as he processed what was being offered. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it would mean leaving behind everything he'd built on New Babylon Station. More than that, it would mean accepting responsibility for protecting reality itself from forces that most humans couldn't even imagine. "What happened to the species that originally established the Silent Watch?" he asked suddenly. The 3 Guardians exchanged glances that suggested the question touched on painful history. "The architects," Watcher Keith said finally, were the first to encounter the deep dark, approximately 50,000 years ago. They developed the initial Guardian protocols and established the first threshold watches, but they underestimated the psychological cost of constant exposure to interdimensional forces. They're extinct? Not extinct. Transcended, in a sense. After millennia of Guardian duty, their consciousness became so adapted to multidimensional existence that they could no longer maintain coherent individual identity in baseline reality. Keeper Valix's patterns darkened. They exist now as collective entities, powerful enough to maintain several major thresholds but no longer recognizable as individuals. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And this happens to all species that serve as guardians for long enough? To varying degrees, yes. The mental adaptations required for dimensional interface inevitably alter the fundamental nature of consciousness. Most species begin showing collective tendencies after several thousand years of service. Watcher Keth's expression was somber, but humans may be different. Your natural capacity for collective consciousness enhancement suggests you might be able to achieve the necessary mental adaptations without losing individual identity. Elena looked up from her notes. You're talking about an evolutionary leap. Humans who can interface with multiple dimensions while maintaining individual consciousness. We are talking about the potential for your species to become the most effective guardians the galaxy has ever known, Keeper Valix confirmed. But we are also talking about changes to human consciousness that would be irreversible. The choice must be made with full understanding of the consequences. Marcus stood up and walked to the porthole, looking out at the stars that had been his guides during his merchant marine days. Those simple points of light now represented a galaxy filled with 17,000 potential breach points, most of them inadequately guarded against entities that wanted to devour inhabited reality. If I said no, he asked without turning around, what would happen to the unguarded thresholds? We would continue as we have for 50 millennia, Keeper Valix replied. Monitoring what we can, responding to crises when they occur, and accepting that some breaches are inevitable. The deep dark is patient but not inactive. Without expanded Guardian coverage, we estimate that approximately 3 to 5 thresholds will fail annually. And each failure represents the potential loss of entire star systems before the breach can be contained. Marcus turned back to face the room. How long do I have to decide? The High Council requires an answer within 1 standard week. If you accept, training would begin immediately. If you decline, we will respect your choice and continue to guard this particular threshold, as we have for the past 17 generations. After the Guardians left, Marcus found himself alone with Elena and Commander Walsh. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a physical force, and he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he chose would fundamentally alter not just his own life, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. You know you don't have to carry this alone, Elena said gently. The network effect suggests that other humans could be trained alongside you. This doesn't have to be a burden you bear by yourself. Commander Walsh nodded. I've been in contact with Earth Command. If you agree to the training, they're prepared to establish a formal Guardian Corps within the Human Defense Forces. You wouldn't be the only human learning these abilities. Marcus appreciated their support, but he also understood that the choice ultimately came down to him. He was the one who had successfully interfaced with the threshold. He was the one whose consciousness had proven compatible with dimensional Guardian protocols. Whatever humanity's future role in protecting the galaxy, it would begin with his decision. That evening, after closing the bar, Marcus sat in the corner booth where it had all started. The Guardian was maintaining their vigil as always, but now their presence felt less like a mysterious threat and more like a reassuring constant. The frost patterns on the table had evolved into something beautiful, mathematical equations that described the fundamental structure of reality itself. Do you regret it? Marcus asked the Guardian. Giving up your original existence to become something that protects others? The Guardian considered the question for a long moment. I remember my life before the transformation, though it feels distant now, like something that happened to someone else. I had family, personal ambitions, fears, and hopes that seemed important at the time. They paused, their silver-flecked eyes reflecting depths that Marcus was only beginning to understand. But I also remember the first time I successfully prevented a breach. The moment I realized that my individual existence had become part of something infinitely larger and more meaningful. And the loneliness? Sitting in places like this for decades, watching over thresholds that most people don't even know exist. There is loneliness, yes, but there is also connection to every guardian across the galaxy, to the ancient purpose that binds us together, to the countless lives we protect who will never know our names. The guardian's expression softened, and occasionally there are humans who throw us out of bars and then save the universe through sheer stubborn determination. Marcus laughed despite himself. I still owe you an apology for that. You owe me nothing. Your actions that night demonstrated something that 50,000 years of Guardian service has never achieved. You proved that protection of reality doesn't require the surrender of individual identity. You found a third path between isolation and transcendence. Outside, the first light of New Babylon Station's artificial dawn was beginning to cycle through the corridors. Marcus had 6 more days to make his decision, but as he sat in the booth where he'd first encountered forces beyond human understanding, he began to realize that the choice had already been made the moment he'd decided to help hold the line against the deep dark. The question wasn't whether he would accept the training. The question was how to convince humanity that their destiny lay not just among the stars, but in the spaces between realities where ancient entities waited for any weakness in the barriers that kept them at bay. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Threshold Station Alpha, watching as the latest group of human trainees practiced dimensional interface techniques under the guidance of Guardian instructors. What had started as a desperate improvisation in a bar had evolved into something that even the ancient keepers of the Silent Watch described as unprecedented. The training facility was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built jointly by human and Guardian technologies in the space around New Babylon Station. It incorporated the best of both approaches, human adaptability and innovation, combined with 50,000 years of Guardian wisdom and experience. The result was a training program that could prepare human consciousness for dimensional interface work in months, rather than the centuries traditionally required. Marcus wore the deep green uniform of a First Circle human Guardian, the silver threading incorporating both traditional Guardian star charts and uniquely human mathematical principles. The transformation of his consciousness over the past months had been profound, but not destructive. Unlike the ancient architects, humans seemed capable of expanding their awareness without losing their individual identity. If anything, the network effect that Elena had first observed had grown stronger, creating a collective consciousness enhancement that preserved personal autonomy while amplifying group capabilities. The 43rd graduating class, Elena said, joining him at the observation window. She now served as the chief medical officer for the Human Guardian Corps, studying the physiological and psychological effects of dimensional training, and still no signs of the identity dissolution that affects other species after extended exposure. Marcus nodded, watching as one of the trainees successfully opened and stabilized a practice threshold interface. The student was Maria Santos, a former engineering officer from a cargo hauler who had volunteered for Guardian training after experiencing the consciousness enhancement effect during the original crisis. Her natural technical aptitude had translated remarkably well to dimensional mechanics. How many active Guardians do we have now? Marcus asked. 412 fully trained, with another 600 in various stages of preparation. The High Council has officially assigned us responsibility for 173 thresholds across 15 sectors. Elena's voice carried a note of pride. We're ahead of all projections for expansion and effectiveness. The success of the Human Guardian Corps had surprised even its most optimistic supporters. Humans, it turned out, approached dimensional interface work with a pragmatic creativity that complemented the more ritualistic methods of traditional Guardians. Where other species relied on ancient protocols passed down through generations, humans improvised, adapted, and developed new techniques that often proved more efficient than established methods. Marcus's personal contribution had gone beyond his role as the first human to interface with a threshold. His natural ability to teach and inspire others had made him an ideal instructor, and his experience running a business had provided unexpected insights into the logistics of managing a galaxy-spanning protection network. The Human Guardian Corps operated with the efficiency that impressed even the ancient keepers. Any word from the deep dark monitoring stations? Marcus asked. Elena's expression grew more serious. Actually, yes. The automated sensors are detecting decreased pressure on the dimensional barriers across all monitored sectors. The deep dark entities seem to be pulling back from active probing. This was perhaps the most significant development since the establishment of the Human Guardian Corps. For the first time in recorded history, the entities from beyond reality appeared to be retreating, rather than constantly seeking new weakness to exploit. Do we know why? The leading theory is that our rapid expansion of Guardian coverage has created a deterrent effect. The Deep Dark may be intelligent enough to recognize that the barriers are now too well defended to breach easily. Elena paused, consulting her tablet. But there's another possibility that some of the keepers are discussing quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Which is? That human consciousness, when properly trained, may be inherently incompatible with Deep Dark influence. Our network-based awareness might create a form of dimensional resonance that actively repels their presence, rather than simply blocking it. The implications were staggering. If humans weren't just effective guardians but actually toxic to the Deep Dark entities, it would explain both the rapid success of the Guardian Corps and the apparent retreat of the cosmic threat that had menaced the galaxy for 50 millennia. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Marcus activated his personal communicator and found himself looking at the image of Keeper Valix. Their starlight patterns brighter than he'd ever seen them. Guardian Chen, the High Council has reached a momentous decision. Based on the unprecedented success of human dimensional interface capabilities and the apparent retreat of Deep Dark activity in sectors under human protection, we are formally requesting that humanity assume primary responsibility for galactic threshold defense. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. What exactly does that mean? It means, my friend, that your species has evolved from a newcomer to galactic civilization to its most essential protector in less than one standard year. The ancient duty that has rested on the shoulders of dozens of species for 50,000 years is now yours to bear. Keeper Valix's expression showed deep respect, and for the first time since the architects first encountered the Deep Dark, we believe that victory rather than mere containment may be possible. After ending the communication, Marcus returned to watching the training exercises below. The human students worked with a confidence and enthusiasm that spoke to their species' fundamental optimism. They approached the awesome responsibility of protecting reality itself with the same determined pragmatism that had carried humanity from a single world to the stars. Jenny Martinez, now serving as the Corps' logistics coordinator, approached with a tablet full of reports. The new threshold assignments are coming in from the High Council. They want us to take over responsibility for the entire Orion arm within the next 2 years. Marcus smiled, thinking about the path that had led him from a bar owner annoyed by a mysterious customer to the leader of humanity's newest and most important calling. What does our capacity assessment look like? With current graduation rates and the expansion of training facilities to Earth, Mars, and the Centauri colonies, we should be able to meet the assignment timeline easily. The volunteer rates are exceeding all projections. Jenny grinned. Apparently, young humans find the idea of protecting the universe from cosmic horror surprisingly appealing. As the artificial evening cycle began aboard Threshold Station Alpha, Marcus made his way back to his quarters. But first he stopped by the recreation area that had been modeled after his old bar. The familiar setting provided a sense of continuity with the life he'd left behind. Though everything else had changed beyond recognition, the Guardian who had started it all was there, as Marcus had known they would be. They no longer maintained a constant vigil, since the new Babylon threshold was now protected by a full team of human guardians working in shifts. But they often came to the recreation area to observe the species that had transformed everything they thought they knew about dimensional protection. Any regrets? The Guardian asked as Marcus joined them at a table near the window. Marcus looked out at the stars, each one now representing not just distant suns but potential homes for civilizations that could sleep safely because humans stood watch in the spaces between realities. None at all. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't thrown you out of my bar that night. The Deep Dark would have continued its patient probing until it found a weakness. Eventually something would have given way, and the entities would have established their foothold in our reality. The The Guardian's silver-flecked eyes met his. Your actions that night didn't just save New Babylon Station. They initiated the sequence of events that may well save the entire galaxy. And all because I thought you were bad for business. The Guardian's laugh was warm with affection and respect. The universe, it seems, has an excellent sense of irony. The species that nearly drove me away became the salvation we had been seeking for 50,000 years. Outside the window, the stars continued their ancient dance, but now they danced under the protection of human guardians, who had learned to see beyond the boundaries of a single reality. In bars and monitoring stations across the galaxy, ordinary humans performed extraordinary duties, standing watch against forces that existed in the spaces between dreams and nightmares. Marcus raised his glass of synthetic whiskey, made from his grandfather's recipe and served now in the most important bar in the galaxy. To unexpected customers, he said, and the consequences we never see coming. The Guardian raised their own glass, filled with the same Terran brandy they had ordered that first night. To Marcus Chen of Earth, they replied, who taught the universe that the best guardians are the ones who never wanted the job in the first place. Above them, the stars shone down on a galaxy where humanity had found its true calling, not in conquest or exploration, but in the quiet heroism of stand-in.